We were living in Portland, Oregon, and we were renting a boarding house. We had a jazz musician in the attic, and we had a kinetic sculptor in the basement, and we had a couple of regular working guys in the bedrooms. It was a huge old house. And we had a tarot reader. So I'm being a mom and a wife and cooking for this boarding house, and the guys would all leave in the morning, and the tarot reader would come down. She'd roll up a big doobie, just like, and have a cup of coffee. And one morning when she did that, she said, "Let's read your cards. Let's go."
Is the luck, magic, and serendipity that we experience written in the stars? Well, my next guest is a devoted student and expert on astrology, and she has been reading the stars and the planets and a whole lot more for the last 45 years, and whose own journey to astrology was influenced by serendipity. Welcome back to another episode of This Magic Life. I'm your host, Andrea Koppel. But before we start today's very special interview, I want to make sure that you have subscribed to the show here on YouTube, or if you prefer on the go listening, you can always subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And please give us a like and share your takeaways from today's episode wherever you're listening or watching. You can find all of the links below in the show's description. Now, my friends, get ready for what I promise you is going to be a truly celestial treat. Whether you are new to astrology or whether you have been well versed in it, my next guest, Carol Ferris, is going to take your understanding of this ancient art to a whole new level. Carol describes herself as a Jungian astrologer, which I'm going to have her explain to you in just a minute. And like so many of us, her journey to astrology happened by chance. She has since grown that interest into a thriving business with clients all over the world, and she also offers classes and workshops. And make sure to stay tuned until the end because Carol has agreed to demonstrate this art and how she does what she does by reading my chart just for a few minutes to give you a peek into what's in store for me this year, as well as share a little bit about what all of us can expect in terms of her astrological insights into the final quarter of 2024. Carol, welcome to This Magic Life.
Thank you. I love being here. Thanks, Andrea.
I know you mean that both literally and metaphysically.
I do.
So before we get into how you serendipitously stumbled into astrology, I was hoping that you could give our audience a quick overview of what astrology actually is and what it is not, because I think there is some confusion between astrology, tarot card reading, and a whole bunch of other stuff.
A lot of people think that astrology is a language of causality. We know the sun and the moon cause things, so it's not a very big step to assume that all of the other planets cause things in their way. I don't rule it out, but this is my gag line about it. If NASA ever digs up testosterone on Mars, I'll believe that the planets are pushing us around. I do not think that's what astrology is about. I could be wrong. The planets may each have their own individual essences that are all interacting. Metaphorically, I love that idea, and there is a lot of astrology that is practiced as if that's true. My own study and my own experience of astrology is it's our understanding of how the forces, the souls and the spirits and the essences of nature here are moving in us, and that we know something about that. We know that winter's not like summer. We know that midnight's not like 3 in the afternoon. So that when we step into a world of incredibly dynamic, moving, expressive, beautiful forces, astrology is a symbolic language that captures our understanding of all of those different movements.
So, where do the stars come into play, or is that just another word for planet?
Well, the stars themselves, the constellations themselves, are timeless. And the planets of the solar system are moving through timeless places. Now, they're not fixed. Our zodiac, our solar system rotates every 2,000 years in a very large 26,000 year sequence. But the stars are timeless. So, what the horoscope is talking about is the movement of the planets in the field of the stars. So, that's where the stars come in. So, for example, the stars of Scorpio are stars where here in our system, we experience that as a time when nature is intensely turning inward and beginning to draw its attention away from the outer field into the inner field. Whereas Taurus, the sign that's opposite that, is where the stars of Taurus, the bull, is where nature is turning itself outwards, not inwards. So that's the sense in which we talk about the stars. And the constellations, the story of the history of the making of the constellations, whether you study the Chinese sky or the Mayan sky or the Colorado Indian sky or the Western sky, every culture has star sky stories. And the planets are moving through all those stories. The forces of our experience are moving in the field of those stories.
So, what isn't astrology? What is not astrology in terms of like misunderstandings that
Okay.
you've
Yeah.
had people express to you?
Astrology is not, this is your story, get used to it. It's not a container that says you're this way and you're going to be like this for the rest of your life. That's one thing I think it is not. I think it's not fate. I don't think it's fate. I do think if astrology is ever about fate, it's because when we step in to this dynamic field of forces in these places, we begin, we adapt ourselves in our way to this large, large field. And it's not, this is your story, get used to it. It's, I got here and this is where I begin, and it's going to change and move forward. So I think if astrology is ever about fate, it's because we get stuck in our stories and we keep telling, this is my story and I'm sticking to it. And even when things are changing around us, and even when we know we're changing, we go, nope, nope, this is my story. And when we do that, we will and continue to encounter the same thing over and over again because we keep generating the story from that primary place instead of having a little more flexibility and fluidity to imagine that our stories actually do grow and change.
Well, I know your story has grown and changed
Yeah,
a lot from when
yeah,
you were in your 20s.
yeah.
Can you take us back, Carol, to the magic moment when you first learned that astrology was in the cards for you? And I am using the word cards deliberately.
Yeah, thank you. It's so wonderful to be asked this question about where did it start. I think I was 22. I was the mother of a very young child. I think Matt was 2.5 or 3. My husband was struggling with who he was wanted to be and what he was going to do, and we were just on the other side of the Vietnam War, so we had quit struggling about where we're going to go to Canada because he would be drafted. And we were living in Portland, Oregon, and we were renting a boarding house. And we had a jazz musician in the attic, and we had a kinetic sculptor in the basement, and we had a couple of regular working guys in the bedrooms. It was a huge old house. And we had a tarot reader. So I'm being a mom and a wife and cooking for this boarding house, and the guys would all leave in the morning and the tarot reader would come down. She'd roll up a big doobie, just like, and have a cup of coffee. And one morning when she did that, she said, "Let's read your cards." And it was like, right, it was, who read my cards? Okay. So she brings down this deck of tarot cards that clearly, I found out later, had belonged to her great grandmother. And her great grandmother had been a reader, her grandmother had been a reader, and her mother had been a reader. And this weight deck that she had inherited from this line of readers was smooth and worn, and all the color practically leached out from all of the hands and all the use. She lays the cards out and she starts to read the cards, and she looks at me and she said, "You should be an astrologer." And I said, it's about the last thing I need to do. My marriage is falling apart. The young parent, I quit college. I think, no, 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 she said. "Let me get you this book." And she runs upstairs and she brings down a book. This is my first of my library, of my extensive library of mythology, philosophy, psychology, geography, astrology. And it's by Dane Rudyard, who was a brilliant thinker and composer in the 1950s, who had, in his theories of composition, stumbled into astrology. And he wrote a small book called The Pulse of Life. And it was just a discussion of the stars, of the zodiac signs: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. And essentially what he said is, spirit moves through time into forms we can know. And I thought, that's the truth. I think that's the truth. But I decided to test it, and I was doing a lot of artwork in those days, and I drew a giant piece of paper with two big concentric circles on it, and I divided it into 12 pie sections, and I laboriously copied the symbols for the zodiac signs around the circle. And in the inner circle, I wrote down the names of women I knew that I felt you could know something about this person, that anyone looking at this person would say, this person is a brainiac, or this person is a hot chick, or this person runs really deep. And not just that I thought that, but that if you looked at them, anybody who looked at them would have that sense of this person. And that was my first pattern, because I knew quite a few of some zodiac signs of women and none of others. It's like, oh,
So
this
you were
is
looking
your pattern. Yeah,
at women that you
that
knew,
I
and
knew.
you were saying, "Oh, yeah, she
Yeah,
does
yeah,
seem like a Taurus," or, "Oh, sure,
yes,
this person does have the
yes,
qualities of a Pisces
yes,
or a Capricorn."
yes. And then I did the same thing on the outer circle with men, a completely different pattern. And so not only was it a pattern that began to educate me about the rhythms of nature through time in a way that I could know, that anyone could know, but it showed me something about my own pattern, that there was something about me that was in relationship with these energies, but not with these.
So how is it that the astrological signs are resonating with nature? Because we don't hear about nature when we're reading the typical horoscope.
No. So the zodiac signs come from, whether they come from ancient Sumer and Assyria or Egypt or China or Central America, are correlated with the rhythms of light and dark. That's the simplest part of the nature of astrology, what the Chinese called yin and yang. So the most yang time of year, which is the lightest time of year, the most active, where there's the most growth and the most expressiveness and the most heat and the most, we could say, consciousness, the sun's longest days, is in our zodiac, the sign Cancer, which is where the sun is reaching its maximum. And so all the symbolism of Cancer is about like the full term pregnancy of the year, where nature's growing and gestating and coming into fruition, but it's not the delivery yet. Then in the next sign, where now the days are starting to get shorter, and so now there's more yin in the system and not so much yang. That's when you get the delivery of the golden child, the king, the Leo, from nature's full term pregnancy of summer. So the zodiac signs are expressions both in our human animal nature and in our literally animal nature, what's growing and what's not. In Celtic astrology, the zodiac signs are tree species. They're not animals or humans. So it's this idea that the our ancestral cultures, keen, astute observers of nature, because they were tied to it in a way we are not. And they made observations about what's growing, what's sprouting, what's fruiting, what's dying, what's resting. And so all of the symbolism of our observations about how nature is moving in time come from that primary observation.
So I know, Carol, that you didn't move into astrology as a career for a number of years down the line
Yeah,
after you met the tarot card reader.
yeah.
You ended up going to work as an executive secretary and worked your way up. And at the latter part of your career, you were actually a vice president of public affairs.
Yes.
So when did you realize, I actually think that astrologer or excuse me, that tarot card reader was right,
Was
and
right.
I actually am an astrologer at heart?
I left corporate life after I met my dear husband and put my plane on my son on the plane to college. Met my husband. He and I got married 3 weeks later. And he said, "What did you always want to do?" And I always wanted to paint. But when my people that I'd been practicing on as a hobby all the years I was in corporate life found out I was available full time, by this time it's the 90s. So I've had 20 years, essentially 25 years of part-time hobby, intense, passionate practice. And now I'm not working in corporate life anymore. And when clients found out I was available weekdays, instead of ending up in a studio, I ended up doing astrology full time. And I went to my first big astrology conference in Cirencester, England in 1995. And I'm a suit. I've been a suit. I'm still a suit. That's what I've been. And astrology is just a hobby. And now I'm at a conference with a bunch of very fine astrologers, but also a lot of women in floaty long dresses with moons on them, and people who are dowsers and crops. I mean, in England, they take their esoteric arts really seriously. And so the astrology conference had as many of those as it did astrologers. But I met brilliant astrologers who were the keynote speakers. And I looked around and I thought, I'm not a suit. I'm an astrologer, and this is my work. But that's a long arc from I think this is the truth and I want to understand it, and studying it passionately and intensely, to this is what I do in the world. This is what I care about in the world. This is what I want to share in the world. I always was doing that part-time. It just became full-time. It's still all I want to do. I mean, I have a part-time printmaking practice and I'm a grandparent, and I like to travel and I study Chinese medicine and I have a lot of other interests, but astrology has been that central pulse through everything that I've done.
What is it about astrology that has captivated you for so many years?
It's that we can know the stories in front of us. We can know, like, if I sit with you and I look at your chart, and I am in the audience of a remarkable story. So for me, I can sit and look at the Douglas fir trees and watch the rain and see the animals move. It's a story. And this is the reason that I got so interested in Carl Jung and Jungian psychology, was because essentially Jung's journey, his Red Book journey in particular, he quote discovered unquote for modern psychology the what he came to call the collective unconscious, and what other cultures call the Tao, or physicists call the quantum field, or esotericists call the Atman, or the Akashic records, or this idea that there is this rich place where everything is always becoming but not yet here. And so, as an astrologer, what keeps me interested in is what's showing up now. What form is this juice taking now? And what in particular is moving in the story, including what's horrific or difficult or depressing or joyful or expansive, that as an astrologer you get to be in the presence of the constant creativity of the cosmos and its many incredible creations, and it's never gets old.
You mentioned the reading of someone's chart, and I've had the good fortune to have had my chart read by you a few times, and this is my astrological chart, my natal chart. This is where there's the most activity here, which is in the 8th house. What is the 8th house, Carol?
The 8th house is where we are transitioning from public to private. It's a betweenness place. And the image that I have of the 8th house is it's an altar where we're in our bodies, and we know we're subject to gravity and time, but we are beginning to turn towards other possibilities which are not limited by gravity and time. So the 8th house is, if we think of an altar, not particularly in a religious sense, but as an intersection between matter and spirit, then the 8th house is where we are both giving something up and out and receiving something in. So it's where we're really attuned to message. And this is the second place where being attuned to possibility shows up in your chart, because the moon is there. I'm hungry for this. And Jupiter is there. I get it. I'm good at reading the signs in my own way. So now the winds that are blowing in terms of the current time, the moon, Chiron, the descendant, the North Node, and Neptune, says to you, Andrea, pay attention to this facility in yourself to be able to both be concrete and practical and down to earth and understand what the responsibilities and expectations of here are, but use that place to tune in to what else might be possible, whether you do it through intuition, what we could call psychic ability. The moon in the 8th house is a psychic signature. To receiving, to be open to receiving what it is that this place wants to bring into the practical material world. And with the passage of time, two very powerful astrological winds, we could say, are blowing in this very public place. And it's Mars, action, Jupiter, fortune, and Uranus, revolution. So where you are a public person, where you're making podcasts, where you're asked to speak up, where you have to step forward to the front of the stage and be seen and deliver something, time itself says to you, Andrea, use your intuition and use what you're receiving in the 8th house and use everything else that's true about you and bring it forward out where people can see it. You will have mastery, you will have fortune, and it will revolutionize things. It will change things for you.
Holy cow. That's a lot of stuff.
I mean, this is really where you and I, that was our last conversation about next steps, because that's the kind of reading that an astrologer does when people go, I kind of think that I want to do this, but if I step into this, what can I expect? And not in the sense of this is your story and this happens next, but we know something about how nature and time moves. And so we can rest in that and kind of step into that flow with some sense about how we are going to interact with what's available to us now.
Carol, as you look in the rearview mirror of your journey to where you are right now, would you say that there have been any other serendipitous or magical experiences that influenced your career journey?
The day I put my son on the plane for Georgetown, my husband invited me. I had met him through work. He called a mutual friend and said, did she think I would be interested in seeing him? He had been widowed a year before. And, I haven't told you this story, but I'll tell this in this context. We liked each other right away. He proposed to me. We saw each other for lunch or dinner every day for a week. He proposed to me on my 40th birthday, and we married 2 weeks later. And when we got married, he said to me, I said, may I take your last name, Ferris? And he said, well, you can call yourself anything you want. Why do you want my last name? And I said, the entire time I was growing up, my mother would look at me and say, I named you Carol Ann, but I should have named you Carol Ferris, because it was my grandmother's first name. And my grandmother and I were soulmates from the minute I was born. And when I met him, even without the vibe that was going on between us, it's like, Byron Ferris. And so it was, to your point, prepared in a certain way, not in the check, 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 but opening something in myself, getting rid of the old story in order to come to possibilities that were clearer to me. And so, he had been widowed for a year. I was now not a single parent. It was like, let's go. And we did. And then in the process of doing that, him saying to me, what did you always want to do? And I still do artwork. It's still very, very, the images and the creation of images and the storytelling of images is still very central to things. And he wasn't too sure about astrology. He really wasn't, but he would greet people at the door and then say goodbye to them afterwards. And he would say, I don't quite understand what you do, but I see you really help people, and that's okay with me.
Oh, how beautiful.
Yeah, he was a great guy. I was lucky.
Thank you for sharing that story. And I really got chills when you said that your mother had said, I should have named you Ferris. And you meet this man
I got the
whose
name I was
last
supposed to
name is
have.
Ferris.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Carol, before we get to the end of the interview where I ask you the questions I try to ask all of my guests, could you give us just very quickly a teeny overview, a teeny window into what our audience, what all of us can expect in the final quarter of 2024? What's in the stars?
All right. One of the things that you don't have to be an astrologer to see that traditions and comfortable, customary rituals are being uprooted, and they will continue to be uprooted. That is for the rest of this year. That we're in a revolutionary signature that is roughly akin to the beginning of the French Revolution. I don't think we're going to see a guillotine. I don't think we're going to see heads rolling. I don't. But what the French Revolution was about and what this revolution is about is people beginning to take more responsibility for themselves and finding and able to work collaboratively with others in a more horizontal citizen way, instead of you're at the top and I'm at the bottom and you make things go around and I'll just do my part here. That's what topples kings. And that's going on all over the world. That's not just the United States and the Republicans and the Democrats and an election coming up. That we are at the beginning of, and at the awareness of thing. It's not business as usual. We can't count on things the way that they've been. There are certain people we can't count on anymore. There's certain habits we have that are not doing us any good. And so we're kind of in the messy middle, like, of, okay, we've realized all of that, but we're not yet where it's like, well, will this work? Will this work? So a part of what the rest of the year is about is not where are my peeps and how can I be a member of a tribe that's against another tribe, but where do I need to take more responsibility for myself so I change what I'm bringing to the world and the contribution I make? And how will that align me with people that I can work with in a beneficial way? So that's one huge signature. The other really huge signature that's going on is a lot of things that we've all been dreaming about and trying to build structures to hold the dreams. This isn't so much the end of the year, but what I was talking about earlier is Pluto in Aquarius. This Saturn in Pisces and Neptune in Pisces is a relationship to what we could call the oceans themselves, global warming, but it's also in relationship to how do we hold the ocean? That's the metaphorical way I say it. And that doesn't mean how do we build a dam or how do we harness the winds, although those are metaphorical ways to think about it. It's how do we remember we're part of something that's bigger than we are? And how do we take our own individuated selves and rest in and reconnect with this source that's bigger than we are? You know, I think a part of global warming is that we quit paying attention to our ground of being. We quit paying attention to nature. We don't think we're a part of it. And when you don't think you're a part of it, then you don't respect it and you don't work with it. And I think the rest of this year and the coming years, those are the two signatures: a revolution that produces more common cause work with each other, and a reconnection with where we come from.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I know from a prior conversation, just in case people are wondering, that Carol has already seen in her readings that Kamala Harris, that's who she sees winning in November, but we'll save that for another longer conversation. uh, Carol, questions I try to ask all my guests.
Okay.
What can our audience do right now in your expertise to become more magical, to experience more serendipities in their life?
That's an easy one for me. Our lives, not just the people and the events and the choices we make outside of ourselves, those pictures, but our hearts, not just our brains and our eyes, our hearts produce images. That was Jung's great gift to psychology, that the heart thinks. And that when we trust our hearts and our heart's connection to source, that we get pictures that are true to us and true for us. And when we pay attention to that, not to cultural voices that say you should be this way and you should be this way, that includes, unfortunately, our parents often. If I had listened to my mother, I would never be an astrologer. You know, my family still are kind of at a remove all these years later, because it's not what they had in their picture of who it was that I was. But even though I didn't know what that picture was, that picture became clearer and clearer and clearer the longer I honored it. And so I would be going along and be like, hotter, hotter, hotter. Yeah, go this way. Hotter. Yes. Not just preferences, not just ego, but resonance.
Your
And
heart.
so you
Your
can
heart
trust,
and your
yeah,
intuition.
you can trust the pictures that your heart is making to you, even when it's like, "Ugh, this just doesn't look anything like I thought it would."
Oh, that is so beautiful. So really tap into what lights your heart up,
Yeah, there's a
what you
wonderful,
love.
yeah. This isn't rocket science. It can have a spiritual cast to it. This is an old Sufi idea. It's an old Jungian idea that the heart makes pictures and that we can recognize them. And I think that's why astrology is a language of the images the heart makes. And that's why when you go to see an astrologer is reading the images. There, it's not like you're this way and you're this way, but your heart is making pictures. And the astrology is looking at the pictures that makes.
So looking back on your career journey thus far,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say, Carol, has been the secret to the magic and the serendipity that you've experienced in your life?
Living in the moment. It isn't that as a younger person, I didn't want to make a contribution or be married or be a parent. I had plans, I had pictures that I was going towards. But the older I got, and certainly from the age I am now, every moment is so rich. And none of us has the luxury of just sitting still and moment to moment to moment feeling blessed by what the world is showing us. None of us, well, maybe some saints, maybe some yogis and people who are in full retreat. But that ability to be present with the moment in the larger context of I have a family I'm responsible for, I have bills I have to pay, I have, a country that I care about, is being present. And I would say, in addition to being present, being curious. And I've had a lot of people say to me, you have more curiosity than anyone I ever met. I certainly is what my parents said to me, is like, what do you mean? Why does it work like that? Like I was watching the guys today install the countertop. It's like, well, how does that work? Well, does this go with, oh, I see. It goes like, no, it doesn't work like that. He said it works like this. It's like, that'll keep you going. Oh, it works like this.
Well, thank you, Carol. And I want to wish you many, many more magical moments to come.
Thank you, Andrea. You too.
Let's go.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of This Magic Life. Our mission is to inspire you to stop fearing your future and start getting excited about all the serendipitous and magical opportunities that await you. Make sure to subscribe to This Magic Life on YouTube so you don't miss any new episodes. And for on-the-go listening, give us a follow wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. We absolutely love to get feedback from the This Magic Life community, so make sure to drop us a comment on YouTube or a 5-star review on Apple. And you can always find me on LinkedIn at Andrea Koppel, aka the Career Magic Maker. I can't wait to see you soon.